Tonight we are celebrating the 175th anniversary of Grace Cathedral. We're 175 years young. Now, what we have become during this time would have seemed absolutely impossible back then. In 1844, only 5 years before our founders had their first service in Grace Chapel, this town was called Yerba Buena. There were only about a dozen houses. The 1842 census listed only 21 inhabitants. Whaling ships preferred to anchor on the Marin side of the Strait of the Golden Gate because there was an abundance of water and wood there, and they knew that there were ranchos there where they could get their food. Richard Henry Dana had visited about 10 years before that, said, quote, "The Californians are an idle, thriftless people and cannot make anything for themselves." The writer Irving Stone described San Francisco in those days, saying, quote, "Somehow the town had not caught on. The Mission Dolores, 4 to 5 miles out from the cove, was falling into ruins. The Presidio, overlooking the strait built by the Spanish in 1776, had been pilfered almost down to its foundations by people wanting free adobe bricks and lumber for their buildings. Nobody wanted to settle in Yerba Buena. The tiny mud and adobe hamlet was the ugly duckling of the far west." By June of 1847, the city's name had been changed by Mayor Washington Allen Bartlett to San Francisco, and the population had risen all the way up to 375. Still not very many people. Those first San Franciscans were an international bunch. They came from around the world, and about 80% of them were under the age of 40. Then, the defining thing happened for San Francisco. On January 24th, 1848, James Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Mill in Coloma. And by December 1849, when we had our first service in our newly built church, 40,000 prospectors had arrived. Almost 40% of them came by sea, some making the 17,000-mile journey around Cape Horn. They wore red flannel shirts, broad felt hats, and they wore coats with revolvers and knives at their belts. By the end of 1850, our first year, San Francisco had a population of 28,000 men and 2,000 women. In May of that year, a fire that started in a saloon burned for 7 hours. It destroyed 300 houses, including City Hall and our major business district. It did $4 million worth of damage. And to put that into perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of half the value of all the gold that they extracted in 1849. And then on June 12th, only 40 days later, another fire caused $3 million worth of damage. In September of that same year, 150 houses burned. In October, $250,000 of property was destroyed. Then in December, $1 million in property was similarly destroyed. We were the most burned over city that the world has ever known. There's never been a city quite like this. Constantly struck down by adversity and then building itself up again. Welcoming newcomers and embracing change are part of its DNA. So late in 1848, 6 influential San Franciscans asked the Episcopal Church in its General Board of Missions to send a priest here. They chose the Reverend Dr. John Ver Mehr, whose departure was delayed slightly by having smallpox. He had the smallpox infection. So he left the East Coast in February of 1849. Now, that was one group of San Franciscans. There was another group of San Franciscans who were very impatient. They felt like there should already be someone here already. And so they reached out to people in New York, and they said, well, just send us this second place finisher. And so the second place candidate was named Flavel Mines, and Mines arrived here on July 4th, 1849, and Ver Mehr arrived almost 2 months to the day later. So this was an accident. They invited 2 different priests to come 3,000 miles to serve the Episcopalians in San Francisco. So those 2 became the founders of Trinity Church on Gough Street and of Grace Cathedral. I love John Ver Meer. I got to know him, not personally, but through his memoirs, A Checkered Life. And he writes about a horrifying incident that happened not after he first got here. 5 sailors were on their way back on their boat, their rowing boat, back to their ship. And they had this idea, well, like if we just conk the officer over the head with the oars and throw him over, then we'll make it and we'll be free and we'll go to the gold fields and we'll be richer than anybody ever imagined. And so they did this. It was a terrible thing they did. They threw the officer overboard, conked him on the head with the oars and tried to escape. But they didn't realize it, but he survived. So the officer made it to land, survived, and then told everybody what happened. And so these 5 men were going to be executed at dawn. And so what did they do? They called John Ver Meer to come and help, to minister to them. And so John Ver Meer helped take care of these men on their last night on earth. And he did such a good job, he convinced 2 of them to basically take the rap for all the rest of them, to say we were the ones who were responsible, and write a letter to the Commodore saying we were the ones responsible, don't hold all of us responsible. And he also was able to do a service for everybody who was there. And Ver Meer wonders if that conversation with the Commodore was the reason why 3 of them were let off. So 3 of them were exonerated from this. And he wonders, too, if the service that they did, the worship service they did, like softened the heart of the Commodore, who was not known for being a merciful man, but who in this case acted with great mercy. So it's just like a little sliver, a little picture of some of the things that Grace Cathedral's been doing. One of the things, when we've done many other things that are like that. We're so blessed to have Ver Meer's emotional account of that first service in the first chapel. So it was December of 1849. It was just a few blocks down Powell. So you go down, you don't go down California Street, turn left on Powell, and just past Jackson. That's where the site of the church was. And this is what Ver Meer wrote about it. It was a 20-foot by 60-foot church, clapboarded with a shingled roof and even 7 windows. He was very proud of the windows. And the people had put rough planks, like pieces of wood that everybody sat on, kind of like sawhorses and planks. In the night before this first service, he went around and he took every single one of the prayer books. They'd been given a whole bunch of prayer books by the Mission Society, and he marked each prayer book so that the people who came to church the next day would know how to follow the service. And as he was doing that, he had a brilliant idea. He decided this will be called Grace. This chapel will be called Grace Chapel. And the word grace means a free gift, a gift that you receive from God that you didn't deserve. And that is the gift of our existence. It's the gift of the relationships we have one another that sustain us through life. That is the gift of grace. And here's what he said. He said about the first service. I love this in the new church. He's so excited. It practically comes off the page. On Sunday morning, from my narrow vestry room, I heard preparations. A bell, the gift of Mr. Frank Ward, had been tolling. I peeped through the canvas partition. Sturdy miners came in and took their seats on the rough planks, taking up the prayer books and evidently in earnest. Others came, a few ladies, very few. At last, the tolling bell ceased, the organ struck, and I walked to the altar. That morning service, I shall not forget. The responses were loud and clear. My first sermon was listened to with attention. The offertory was read. The plates went round. There was not one single silver piece on them. I had nothing but gold to offer at the altar. Now, in these memoirs, Ver Meer singles out 2 ministries in particular that just gave him such great joy. And the first was he named every single singer in that first church service by name in his memoirs. He loved them and was so grateful to those 5 singers. If he could see all 70 of you today singing, he would be so happy. And the other thing that he did was 3 weeks later, he started a school. And this is what he wrote about it. He said, I opened a parish school where all children without distinction of creed were admitted free, and during 5 hours received instruction. In a few weeks, there were over 70 scholars. Now, all this happened 175 years ago, and today we're still deeply proud of our choirs and our schools. And we're grateful that each generation, through God's grace, has made a contribution to our life together. In the face of chaos and danger and violence, our forebears were inspired by the love and presence of Christ. They saved lives, such as those of the mutineers, and they saved souls, like that of the Commodore. Grace Cathedral grew up with this city. We share similar values. We are open to people from different backgrounds and faiths. We care that everyone has a voice. We believe in our traditions and in listening to the Spirit as we try new things. We exist for everyone in the city, and not just for those who worship here on Sundays. And in the face of adversity, we rebuild. I wish so much that John Ver Meer could see us all gathered here together. It would just delight his heart and his soul. Thank you for celebrating God's goodness here together tonight, and for your work in building what Grace Cathedral will be 175 years from today, in the year 2200.